The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in December, 2 weeks before Christmas, and it carried within it the weight of a choice that would change everything. Private Marcus Williams held the envelope in his hands, the paper worn and thin from being carried in a transport truck across thousands of miles, from a military base in Germany to a small town in rural North Carolina, where his family still lived. The handwriting on the envelope was his mother's, familiar and comforting even in the midst of war, even in the midst of being thousands of miles away from home, even in the midst of knowing that he would not be coming home for Christmas. The letter itself smelled like home, like his mother's perfume, like the small farmhouse where he had grown up surrounded by people who loved him. Marcus was 23 years old and had been stationed in Germany for 14 months. He had enlisted in the military 4 years earlier, right after high school, driven by a combination of patriotic fervor, economic necessity, and the desire to escape the small town where he had grown up. The military had given him structure, purpose, direction. It had given him training in skills that he would never have learned otherwise. It had given him brothers and sisters in arms, people who would die for him and for whom he would die. But it had also taken him away from home, had placed him in situations of danger and uncertainty, had exposed him to things that he could not unsee, could not forget, things that had changed him in fundamental ways that he did not fully understand. The base in Germany was thousands of miles from home. The distance was not just geographical, but temporal. It was the difference between day and night, between seasons, between the rhythms of life that Marcus had known his entire life, and the rhythms of military deployment. He worked in logistics, organizing supplies and equipment, maintaining records that kept the military operation functioning. It was important work, but it was also isolating work, work that kept him on the base, work that did not allow for leave or breaks or time to process what he was experiencing. The letter from his mother began with the typical maternal concerns. Was he eating enough? Was he staying warm? Was he being careful? But then it shifted into something deeper, something that caught Marcus off guard as he sat in the barracks reading. His mother wrote about Christmas dinner, about the family traditions that would continue without him, about how his younger brother Tommy was growing up, how his sister Sarah was finishing her first semester of college, how his father was doing okay, but was missing him. She wrote about the empty chair at the Christmas table, about how Christmas would be different without him, about how much they all missed him, about how the house felt empty when he was gone. His mother described what she was planning for Christmas dinner. She wrote about the turkey that she had already ordered, about the way she was planning to prepare it with herbs and butter the way her mother had taught her. She wrote about the sweet potato casserole that Sarah insisted on, the one with the marshmallows on top that Marcus had always eaten too much of as a child. She wrote about the dressing that his father made, the recipe that had come from their family for generations. She wrote about the gravy, about the rolls, about all the small details that made Christmas dinner what it was, details that Marcus had taken for granted when he was home, details that he missed profoundly now that he was away. Then, at the end of the letter, his mother wrote something that Marcus read 3 times before he fully understood it. She wrote, "This Christmas, I want you to know that you are part of this family dinner even if you cannot be here in body. Everything we eat thinking of you. Everything we do with gratitude for your service and your sacrifice. We will set a place for you at the table and in our hearts. You will be here. We will talk about you. We will tell stories about you. We will wish you were here. And we will be grateful that you are alive, that you are healthy, that you are serving your country with honor. But we will also miss you. Your absence will be felt. Your empty chair will be a reminder that you are important to us, that you matter to us, that we love you." The words broke something open in Marcus. He was sitting in the barracks, in a room filled with other soldiers, and he found himself struggling to breathe, struggling to maintain composure, struggling not to cry in front of people who had to see him as a soldier, as someone strong and capable and dependable. He had known that he would miss Christmas with his family. He had accepted that. He had told himself that it was part of military service, that sacrifice was part of the job, that he was doing something important and necessary. But reading his mother's letter, understanding that his family would be sitting around the table without him, understanding that they would be setting an empty place for him, understanding that they would be thinking of him while eating food that he would not be eating, something shifted inside him in a way that he could not control. He read the letter multiple times. He memorized passages. He carried it with him. He took it out and read it when he was alone, when he was overwhelmed by the homesickness that had crept up on him slowly over 14 months and had now become overwhelming. He thought about what it meant to be part of a family table remotely, what it meant to be present in spirit but absent in body, what it meant to know that his mother was setting a place for him while he sat in a military barracks in Germany. The realization that he was missing something profound, something that could not be recreated later, something that had a specific time and place and could not be moved or postponed, began to consume his thoughts. Over the following days, Marcus could not stop thinking about Christmas dinner with his family. He thought about his mother's cooking, about the way she made turkey with herbs and butter, about the stuffing that his father had taught her to make the way his grandmother had made it, about the sweet potato casserole with marshmallows that Sarah insisted on, about the gravy that seemed to taste like home in a way that nothing else could. He thought about sitting around the table with people he loved, people who had known him since birth, people who knew him before he was a soldier, people who knew him as just Marcus, their son, their brother, a person with vulnerabilities and fears and needs alongside his strengths. He started calculating obsessively. The military gave him leave, but his leave would not come until after Christmas. He was supposed to stay in Germany until the end of December and then rotate back to the United States for 2 weeks of leave in January. That was the way the schedule worked. That was the way military deployments operated. You did not get to choose when you came home. You served your time, completed your rotation, and then you were allowed to go. The schedule was inflexible. The institution did not make exceptions. The institution did not care about individual families or individual circumstances. The institution cared about objectives and operations and the smooth functioning of military logistics. But Marcus began to think about what would happen if he did not follow that schedule, if he did not accept the rotation, if he made a different choice. He calculated the distance. North Carolina to Germany was roughly 4,500 miles by air, but by land and sea it was different. He could travel through Europe, find passage across the Atlantic, arrive in the United States, and then make his way to North Carolina. It would be difficult. It would be expensive. But it was possible. The question was not whether it was possible. The question was whether he was willing to do it, whether he was willing to accept the consequences. He talked to his barracks mates about it, testing the idea with people he trusted. They told him he was crazy. They told him that going AWOL, that leaving his post without permission, was a federal crime. They told him that he could go to prison, that he could face years of incarceration if he was caught. They told him that he would lose his military career, that he would destroy everything he had built in the military, that the discharge from the military for desertion would follow him for the rest of his life and would make it difficult for him to find civilian employment. They told him that it was not worth it, that no Christmas dinner, no matter how important, was worth the cost of federal prison. But they also understood, in the way that soldiers understand, that sometimes the pull of home was stronger than the pull of duty, that sometimes a man needed to be with his family, that sometimes duty to family superseded duty to institution. They understood because they had experienced it themselves, the longing to be home, the knowledge that important moments were happening without them, the feeling of separation that was not just physical but psychological, that affected their ability to function, their mental health, their sense of themselves as human beings rather than simply as soldiers. Marcus wrote a letter to his commanding officer. He explained his situation carefully and respectfully. He explained that his family was struggling with his absence, that his mother's letter had revealed a depth of missing him that he had not fully understood, that he needed to be with them for Christmas. He asked, formally and respectfully, for emergency leave. He knew the answer would likely be no. Christmas leave was limited, and priority was given to soldiers with longer deployment schedules or to soldiers whose families had genuine emergencies. His mother missing him, while emotionally true, did not constitute a genuine emergency in military terms. But he asked anyway because you could not know what might be possible if you did not ask, because sometimes military officers recognized the humanity of the soldiers under their command. The answer came back within 2 days. It was no. His commanding officer was sympathetic but firm. The military schedule was the military schedule. Everyone had family they missed. Everyone had holidays they wanted to spend at home. But military service meant understanding that sometimes you could not be where you wanted to be, that sometimes duty required sacrifice, that sometimes you had to put your responsibility to your country above your desire to be with family. The order was final. No exceptions. No additional appeals would be considered. Marcus received the denial in the afternoon. By evening, he had made his decision. He was going to go home. Not with permission. Not through official channels. But he was going to walk away from the base and make his way to his family for Christmas dinner. He was going to commit what the military would define as desertion, what the law would define as going AWOL, what his military career would define as the end of his service. And he was okay with that. Some things were more important than military career. Some things were worth sacrificing everything for. Some things mattered more than institutional approval or legal consequences, or the preservation of his record. He planned carefully. He knew that leaving during the day would be too obvious. He waited until night, until the watch changed, until there was a moment of confusion and transition when guards were rotating and attention was divided. He put on civilian clothes that he had bought in town during a pass, clothes that would not identify him as military, clothes that would let him disappear into civilian populations. He packed a backpack with a few possessions that mattered to him, his wallet with his remaining money, some extra clothing, his mother's letter, and a photo of his family. He did not take much. He could not take much. He had to be able to move quickly and disappear into the civilian population. He walked out of the base at 11 o'clock at night on December 10th. He did not say goodbye to anyone. He did not leave a note. He simply walked through a gate that was momentarily unmanned and disappeared into the German night. Once he was off the base, he started moving toward the nearest train station. He had money saved from his military pay. Not much, but enough to buy a train ticket to a port city where he might be able to find passage back to the United States, where he might be able to find a way home. The journey was difficult and frightening in ways that Marcus had not fully anticipated. He was now technically a fugitive. He was breaking laws that could result in federal prosecution. He was putting himself at risk of being caught and arrested. He moved through Germany and toward the coast, staying in cheap hotels that did not ask questions, eating minimally to preserve his money, trying to be inconspicuous and not attract attention. He used cash so that there would be no trace of his movements on financial records that could be traced by military or civilian law enforcement. He avoided official checkpoints and border crossings where he might be questioned about his travel documents or his purposes. By December 15th, he had made it to a port city on the northern coast of Germany. He spent 2 days looking for passage to the United States. He could not book an official passage because that would create a record that could be traced by military investigators. But he found a cargo ship that was heading to New Jersey, captained by a man who was willing to overlook the fact that Marcus had no official papers, no passport, nothing that would allow him to legally leave the country. The captain was an older man, weathered by years at sea, and he seemed to recognize something in Marcus, seemed to understand that this young man had reasons for traveling without official documentation. The captain understood, or perhaps he simply did not care, and he allowed Marcus to work his passage, to work in the cargo hold in exchange for transportation to America. The crossing was brutal in ways that Marcus had not anticipated. December in the Atlantic Ocean was not a time for pleasure cruises. The ship was a working vessel carrying cargo, not passengers, and the accommodations were minimal and harsh. Marcus worked 12-hour shifts moving cargo, loading and unloading containers, organizing equipment in the hold. He slept in a small bunk below deck that was cramped and damp and cold. He ate whatever food the cook prepared, food that was adequate for sustenance, but not for pleasure. He was seasick for the first 3 days, vomiting over the side of the ship while other workers laughed or ignored him. He was exhausted all the time, his body pushed beyond its limits, his mind foggy from lack of sleep and constant work. But he was moving toward home. Every day on the ship brought him closer to his family, closer to Christmas dinner, closer to his mother and father and Sarah and Tommy. During the quiet moments, during the rare breaks when he was alone in his bunk or during his limited free time, Marcus thought about what he was doing. He thought about the fact that he was now a deserter, that the military would be looking for him by now, that his name would be on lists, that his absence would have been reported. He thought about the fact that the military took desertion seriously, that it was a federal crime, that he could face years of incarceration if he was caught and prosecuted. He thought about the consequences that would follow when he returned to the United States, about the arrest that would inevitably follow when he tried to reintegrate into civilian life, about the court-martial that would proceed without mercy or compassion. But mostly he thought about his family, about being at home, about sitting at the Christmas table with people who loved him, about the moments that mattered more than any legal consequence or institutional punishment. The ship arrived in New Jersey on December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas. Marcus left the vessel early in the morning, when the dock was chaotic and crowded, when workers were moving containers and cargo and equipment, when no one was paying attention to the movements of individual workers. He walked into the industrial area surrounding the port and then away from it, into the city, where he could disappear into the crowds of people, where he could blend in and become invisible. He had no money left. The crossing had exhausted his savings. The few dollars he had left in his pocket were barely enough for food. But he had time and determination. He had 200 miles to cover and 3 days to do it. He started walking. He walked out of New Jersey and into Pennsylvania. He walked along highways and back roads, avoiding main routes where police might be more likely to stop and question a man who looked like he did not belong, a man who was traveling on foot, a man who had no vehicle and no obvious destination. He got rides from truckers who were sympathetic, who asked few questions, who simply allowed him to ride along in exchange for conversation or assistance with their route. He slept in truck stops and abandoned buildings and bus stations. He went hungry on the first day because he had no money for food and no way to get it. But on the second day, he found a shelter run by a church that provided meals to people in need, and he ate there without identifying himself, without drawing attention, without revealing that he was a military deserter. The walking was brutal on his body. Marcus had been trained in the military to walk long distances with heavy packs, to endure physical hardship, to push his body beyond what seemed possible. But this was different. This was walking without military support, without the infrastructure of military logistics, without the knowledge that there was a destination that made sense, that had a military purpose. This was walking for love, walking for family, walking for the chance to sit at a table with people who had shaped his entire life. Every mile was difficult, but every mile was also worth it because every mile brought him closer to home, closer to the people he loved, closer to the moment when he would sit at the Christmas table. By December 24th, Christmas Eve, Marcus had walked most of the way through Pennsylvania and was entering North Carolina. He had covered nearly 200 miles over the course of 4 days. He was exhausted. He was hungry. His feet were blistered and bleeding. His clothes were dirty. He looked like a vagrant, like someone who had been living on the streets, like someone who did not belong in normal society. But he was close. He was so close to home that he could almost taste it, could almost feel the warmth of his mother's embrace, could almost smell his mother's cooking. He stopped at a church in the small town nearest to his hometown and asked a priest if he could clean up. The priest, seeing a young man who was obviously in distress, who was clearly struggling with something beyond the visible exhaustion, allowed him to wash his hands and face in the church bathroom. Marcus used the water to clean himself as much as he could. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back at him, hollow-eyed, gaunt, exhausted, desperate. But he was here. He was almost home. Marcus asked if he could use the phone, and the priest, without asking why, let him use the office phone. He called his house. His mother answered. Marcus spoke, and his mother's scream of joy on the other end of the line told him everything he needed to know.
She cried.
She was confused. She did not understand how he was there, how he had gotten leave from the military, how he had managed to travel home so unexpectedly, but she also did not care about the explanations. All she cared about was that he was alive, that he was calling, that he was coming home. The last few miles from the church to his house, Marcus walked. The roads were familiar, roads he had traveled countless times growing up. The landscape was familiar, trees and hills and rivers that he had known his entire life. The smell of the air was familiar, the particular combination of North Carolina winter and home that could not be replicated anywhere else in the world. He walked past landmarks that he had known his entire life. He walked past the school he had attended. He walked past the park where he had played as a child. He walked past the house of his best friend from high school. By the time he reached his house, it was 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve. His family was still awake. They were preparing for Christmas morning. They were setting the table for Christmas breakfast, laying out the good china and silverware, preparing foods that would make Christmas morning special. They had already set an empty place at the Christmas dinner table, a place that they had set for him every Christmas while he was deployed, a physical manifestation of his absence, a reminder of the family member who was not there. When he knocked on the door, when his father opened it and saw him standing there, covered in dirt and exhaustion and love, his father simply stood for a moment and then pulled him into an embrace so strong that Marcus felt like he might break, but did not care. His mother came. His brother Tommy came. His sister Sarah came. They all embraced him. They cried. They asked questions, confused about how he was there, but they also did not really care about the answers. They cared only that he was present, that he was with them, that the empty place at the table would not be empty on Christmas morning, that their family was whole again, at least for this moment, at least for this Christmas. He ate breakfast with them on Christmas morning. He sat at the table with his family and ate together, and every bite of food tasted like home, tasted like love, tasted like sacrifice and determination, and the decision that family mattered more than anything else. His mother prepared his favorite foods, eggs and bacon and homemade biscuits with butter and honey. His father told stories. His siblings laughed and talked. For those moments, Marcus was not a soldier. He was just Marcus, their son, their brother, home for Christmas. He felt the weight of his decision lift slightly, felt the rightness of his choice, felt the confirmation that being here was worth whatever consequences would follow. But Marcus knew that the moment of homecoming was only temporary. He knew that there would be consequences. He knew that the military would be looking for him by now. He knew that there would be questions from authorities. He knew that at some point, he would have to face the legal consequences of his actions, the federal prosecution for desertion, the military court-martial that would determine his fate. But he did not care. He had made the decision consciously, and with full understanding of the cost. He had made the decision understanding that family mattered more than institution, that presence mattered more than obedience, that love was sometimes more important than duty. He spent 3 days with his family. 3 days of Christmas dinners and family time, and the restoration of connection that had been stretched thin by deployment and distance. He told his parents that he had gone AWOL, that he had deserted his post, that military authorities would be looking for him. His parents understood. They did not tell him to go back. They did not criticize his choice. They simply held him and accepted the gift of his presence, knowing that it was temporary, knowing that it had cost him everything, understanding that he had made a choice that honored family above all else. He turned himself in 3 days after Christmas, on December 28th. He called the military police from his parents' house and told them where he was. They came and arrested him. He was taken back into military custody. He was charged with desertion, with going AWOL, with violating federal law and military codes of conduct. The military justice system was swift and stern. Desertion during wartime was a serious crime. The penalties were severe. Marcus was court-martialed. He faced potential prison time, potential lifelong consequences, potential destruction of any future he might hope to have. But something happened during the court-martial proceedings that neither Marcus nor his lawyers had anticipated. The story of Marcus Williams, the soldier who had walked 200 miles to be home for Christmas dinner, the soldier who had given up his military career to sit at his family's table, the soldier who had chosen love over duty, the soldier who had chosen family over institution, began to spread beyond military circles. It spread through social media. It spread through news outlets. It spread through military communities and civilian communities alike. People were moved by the story. People understood the choice he had made. People respected the sacrifice he had made. People saw in Marcus's actions something noble, something honorable, something deeply human. The public attention put pressure on the military to reconsider the charges. The military was sensitive to public perception, sensitive to the image it presented to the American people, sensitive to accusations that it was destroying a young man for the crime of wanting to be with his family. A harsh sentence for a soldier who had deserted to be with his family during Christmas, a soldier who had turned himself in voluntarily, a soldier who had been willing to face consequences for his choice, was not going to play well in public opinion. Media outlets were running the story. People were calling military leadership. The narrative was shifting in ways that the military could not control. The military quietly reduced the charges. Instead of a court-martial for desertion, which could have resulted in years of imprisonment, Marcus was discharged from the military with an other-than-honorable discharge, which was serious but far less devastating than the alternative. He would not serve prison time. He would not face years of incarceration. But the discharge meant that he could not use certain veterans' benefits. It meant that he would face discrimination from some employers who saw the discharge as evidence of unreliability or disloyalty. It meant that he would carry the consequences of his choice for the rest of his life. But it also meant that he was free. He was no longer bound by military obligation. He was no longer stationed thousands of miles away from his family. He was home. Marcus left the military and began the process of reintegrating into civilian life. The discharge meant that employment would be difficult. Many employers who saw an other-than-honorable discharge would assume the worst about him, would assume that he was unreliable, would not want to take the risk of hiring him. But Marcus persisted. He got a job at a local manufacturing plant, doing physical labor at first, then working his way up. He moved back in with his family temporarily, while he saved money to get his own place. He attended community college at night and got certifications in industrial maintenance. He built a stable life. But more importantly, he was present. He was at family dinners every night. He was there when his sister Sarah graduated from college. He was there when his brother Tommy had his first heartbreak. He was there when his parents got older and needed help and support. He was home. 20 years later, Marcus Williams was the manager of the plant where he worked. He had married a woman he met through church. He had 2 children of his own, children who would grow up knowing their grandfather and grandmother, children who would have grandparents present in their lives because Marcus had made the choice to walk 200 miles to be home for Christmas. He had achieved stability and success in civilian life. He had built something meaningful. But every Christmas, he thought about the decision he had made, the walk he had taken, the choice to put family before institution. He thought about the consequences and about whether it had been worth it. The answer was always yes. Every time he sat at the Christmas table with his family, he knew that his choice had been right, that his sacrifice had been justified, that walking 200 miles to be home for Christmas dinner had been one of the most important decisions of his life. His story continued to inspire people. Years later, when the story was rediscovered on social media, when clips of interviews with Marcus began circulating online, it went viral again to a new generation of people. People commented about the power of Marcus's choice, about the way he had prioritized family, about the sacrifice he had made. Military families, who understood the difficulty of separation and deployment, were particularly moved. They saw in Marcus's story the reality of what military service meant, the sacrifice of time with family, the cost of duty, the way that serving your country sometimes meant missing the moments that mattered most. But they also saw something else. They saw that there were limits to duty, that there were moments when family mattered more than institution, that there were choices that transcended military protocol and regulation. They saw that Marcus had made a human choice, a choice that honored his humanity, a choice that recognized that being a soldier did not mean being less of a son, less of a brother, less of a human being who loved and was loved by family. They saw in Marcus's choice a validation of their own feelings about wanting to be home, about missing their families, about the toll that military service took on personal relationships and family bonds. The military's response to Marcus's case also shifted something in how the institution thought about compassionate leave and family support. After his story became public, after military families began advocating for more compassionate policies, after Congress began asking questions about why military members could not get leave to be with their families during important occasions, the military began revising its policies around emergency leave during holidays. They began recognizing that family was important, that sometimes duty to family was as important as duty to country, that military members needed to maintain connections to their families in order to remain mentally healthy and effective soldiers. The policies that eventually emerged were more flexible, more compassionate, more aware of the human dimension of military service. Marcus was eventually offered the opportunity to return to military service with a clean record if he chose to do so. The military, recognizing that his initial discharge had been controversial and that his case had represented an important moment in how institutions thought about their members' humanity, offered to restore his record and allow him to re-enlist if he wanted. The offer came with full apologies for the initial harsh response to his desertion. The offer came with acknowledgement that Marcus had made a human choice, a choice that deserved respect. Marcus considered the offer. He thought about whether returning to military service was something he wanted to do. But ultimately, he declined. He was content with his civilian life. He was content with his choice. He did not need military redemption because he did not believe he had done anything wrong. He had made the right choice, and time and public opinion and his own life experience had validated that choice. Instead, he became an advocate for military families and for the need for more compassionate policies around deployment and leave. He spoke to military leadership about the importance of maintaining family connections. He advocated for policies that allowed soldiers to spend time with their families during important occasions like Christmas, like births of children, like serious illnesses or deaths. He worked with nonprofit organizations that supported military families dealing with deployment-related separation. He gave interviews to media outlets about his experience. He told his story not to glorify his own actions but to advocate for systemic change, to argue that the military institution could be strong and effective while also being compassionate and human. And every Christmas, Marcus sat at his family table with his wife and his children and his parents and his siblings, and he thought about the walk he had taken, the choice he had made, the price he had paid to be there. He thought about the fact that his choice had not only affected his own life, but had also affected policy, had also affected how thousands of other military families thought about separation and duty and family, had also affected the military institution itself in its recognition that service did not require the complete erasure of family bonds. He thought about the young military members who were now able to get leave to be with their families because of the policies that had been changed partly in response to his case. He thought about how one person's choice, made in the midst of desperation and homesickness, had rippled outward to affect thousands of people. He thought about the power of human beings to change institutions when they were willing to act on their values. His children grew up knowing the story of their father, the man who had walked 200 miles to be home for Christmas dinner, the man who had given up his military career to sit at his family's table. His children understood that love for family was not weakness, that choosing family was not failure, that sometimes the most important thing you could do was be present with the people you loved, no matter what the cost. His children understood that institutions were important, but that family was more important. His children understood that there were times when you had to make difficult choices, times when you had to sacrifice something important to do what your heart knew to be right. Comment below, what would you sacrifice to be with your family? What decision would you make if you were forced to choose between duty and family? Marcus Williams' story reminds us that we are human beings first, that family is fundamental to our identity and our well-being, that sometimes the most important service we can provide is presence with the people we love. His choice, made over 2 decades ago, continues to inspire people to think about their priorities, to recognize the value of family, to understand that some things matter more than institutions, more than career, more than any external obligation, more than fear of consequences. This is the story of the soldier who chose family over duty, who walked 200 miles to sit at his family's Christmas table, who sacrificed his military career to be present in person rather than just in spirit. This is the story of human beings recognizing their own needs, their own values, their own priorities. This is the proof that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away from what others expect of you and choose what your heart knows to be true. This is the story of a man who understood that presence is the greatest gift, that being there physically and emotionally is what matters most, that family is the most important institution in a person's life. Remember this Christmas season, your family needs you. Not just your money or your support, but you, your presence, your time, your physical body in the same room as the people you love. There are moments when you will have to choose between duty and family, between obligation and love, between what others expect of you and what your heart knows to be true. When those moments come, remember Marcus Williams and the 200-mile walk. Remember that presence matters. Remember that love is sometimes more important than duty. Remember that being home, being with family, being present to the people you love is worth whatever cost you might have to pay.